Hello and welcome. So here we go, another Sunday conversation here on behalf of the Cuyamungue Institute, but also on behalf of ourselves. It's part of Laura and I's personal interest that we continue these discussions. We just find it part of the fabric of developing our own worldview to talk to lots of people and ask lots of questions and put things in perspective. I think that today's topic is kind of a hot topic. It pushes buttons when you say the word God. People get, well, what do you mean by that? How does that fit into my cosmology of who I am? And are you trying to tell me something? Are you trying to preach something to me? Are you trying to convert me? No, not today. This is not what this is about at all. In fact, the Cuyamungue Institute itself is an independent, non-for-profit educational organization, which foundation is really looking at the anthropology of consciousness. So that's what gives us the jumping off point to have these kinds of conversations. We're looking at parallel research that helps us understand better the experiences that we're having in these ecstatic trance postures. So today's discussion really is, about being able to have a broad discussion and put things in perspective. And Laura's going to tell us a little bit more about how we got here, because last week we had a very interesting conversation that kind of triggered people to respond to us and ask lots of questions, and said, okay, we'll continue the conversation from last week and let's go another direction, and that is look at the evidence for a creator, an evidence for what does that mean. And so as part of our role as an organization is just to moderate a discussion. We're not here to promote a specific thought or belief or philosophy. It's kind of against our nonprofit status, really. We want to maintain the fact that we're an educational organization with an agenda of promoting the safe and ongoing work of the ecstatic trance postures. We felt that today's discussion would be really fascinating, delicious for us, because it's kind of like looking at the parallel world of our experience. And whether you want to define it like we talked about with the discussion about what do you think when you say the word spirits, this parallel discussion about is there a creator and what is that experience, and is it more mythology or is it a real phenomenon that we understand that there's an intelligent universe that surrounds us, and how does this all tie into the experiences that we're having? So I think for my representation of the Institute, I want to show you that we're not here in any way to represent a specific thought, nor are we in any way want to we want to be respectful of your own belief systems and your own worldview and sensitive to your own religious practice. So there's no conflict because we don't have a specific dogma or belief system as part of the Institute. It's more a physiologically based practice. So with all of that said, and with all that introduction, I want to introduce my partner in this crime, a partner who we're always on this journey together. Even prior to the Institute, we've always been searchers, looking at knowledge, looking at information, reading a lot, studying a lot, looking for clues that helps us build our own cosmology, our own belief systems, or our own worldview. So with all that said, Laura Lee, why don't you go ahead and introduce today's topic? And
okay, because life is best lived as an adventure, and we consider deep conversation high adventure, high entertainment. For last week, we got so much response to Ryan Walsh, a neuroscientist, who in describing what we know and don't know about our brains, about the working of the mind, he evoked again and again that there are underlying patterns to the universe that science is finding, that these organizing principles that shape the laws of physics, that shape life and how it got started, how it evolves, that shapes us, our brains, our minds, all of it, that's all we know. So the logical question was, well, does this imply that recognition of what might early cultures have called a creator? In a mythical sense, can we call this his handiwork? And wasn't the background radiation from the Big Bang called, after all, fingerprints of God? So can we say these underlying patterns to the universe that go into shaping life, creating life, what is that? What can we call that? His response was, we cannot say there is a God. On the other hand, we cannot say that there is not. Well, that's we and the collective we. And by email, by phone, we received many responses from you all, passionate, astute, insightful, provocative reactions to this. And that was only a side point that he made. So I thought, well, this warrants more time to discuss, because that was the collective we, but each of us, to some degree, we do answer that for ourselves. It's foundational to our worldview by which we navigate life. We need that compass. We each answer these questions for ourselves, not for society, but we can certainly share our notes and observations along the way. And I want to say that I was, lots more to say on the subject, lots of questions to pose, but I was warned by several people that among these warnings, the very word God is offensive to some people. I was warned, don't get caught up in the typical quagmires that people fall into talking about this. I was warned, you're going to need all your skills as a moderator on this one. I was warned, be sure to get a good night's sleep the day before. So in response to that, I want to say, let me quote two sources. One is my scarf. My scarf says, a smooth sea never made a skillful sailor. Yeah, that's why we need compasses in navigating those seas. And I want to say, we've become fans of Teilhard de Chardin, so I pulled this one. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire. I thought that was beautiful. I say that any discussion like this is a celebration of life and all of the mysteries of the universe that keep us pondering, intrigued, delighted, exploring, and talking. So that is our conversation today. We will discuss all of this. First up, I have asked a few people to weigh in on this, and the most passionate response I got was from Stephen Hecht, husband of Dory, who you've met in our Zooms, residents of Santa Fe. Stephen says he's been interested in the relationship between science and religion since college, when he wrote his BA thesis on the subject in the context of evolutionary theory. He went on to earn an MA in religion, and he points out over the years he's continued his study both in academia and independently, while a practicing doctor of chiropractic medicine for 30 years, now retired. So he's long looked into this meeting point of science and religion, currently immersed in a study of the ancient Hebrew religion. Hey, Stephen, thanks for joining us and welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank
And as I
you.
was saying, I've enjoyed every conversation I've ever had with you, and I consider it a service that you are sharing with us insights from your deep, deep study, reading text many of us will never read. And you have provided a book list, which Paul has posted on the website. So anytime he mentions a book, you can find it there, along with Margaret's. Christine Poole added one, and a few others. So tell us a bit about your background. And why? Why has this been a passionate endeavor for you to look into this intriguing question where science and spirituality meet?
Well, I appreciate the fact that you quoted your scarf. That's a new one for me. So that's very impressive. You can quote a scarf. Anyway, yeah, I just want to get a discussion going here. This is not going to be a lecture. This is going to be some thoughts I had in regard to what Ryan was saying. And I guess I'll just start by saying that don't get hung up on the word God. I mean, God is just a word symbol. You can choose that word symbol, or you can choose a different word symbol. We don't have ultimate knowledge of what we're talking about, so none of these symbols are definitive. Okay, God is just three letters. So use whatever symbol you want to use for transcendent reality, source of creatorship, whatever you want to think about it. So anyway, science and religion, that's been kind of a dividing point in some ways in the growth of Western civilization, but it's also been a dynamic convergence. I mean, there's been a kind of a competition since science got on its feet, let's say in the 17th century, more or less. And, the first scientists were devout Christians, and there was no conflict between science and religion for, a couple of hundred years for most people. And the early scientists, Galileo, Kepler, et cetera, even though they were having political problems with the church and with the Catholic hierarchy, they were devout Christians. So they didn't have a problem making that rational connection. However, as the decades and centuries went on, science began to kind of compose itself and impose itself on civilization, mostly through technological advances and based on scientific knowledge. And religion kind of started to retire a little bit. And the notion of religious knowledge became, in one sense, what was called a God of the gaps. Now, the word God of the gaps was mostly in evolutionary theory. So as you know, Darwin more or less developed that evolutionary theory in the middle of the 19th century. And there were a lot of unknowns that evolutionary theory could not describe at that time. And religious figures would then say, aha, Darwin, science, evolutionary theory cannot describe X, Y, and Z. That proves the existence of God because science cannot explain this historical phenomenon in evolution. Unfortunately, evolutionary theory, evolutionary knowledge went on to explain X, Y, and Z again and again and again and again. And each time that piece of knowledge fell into place, the God of the gaps became smaller and smaller and less significant. And in the minds of many science-oriented people and scientists, God became nothing more than really an unnecessary hypothesis. It is one of the bedrocks of scientific method called Occam's razor. So Occam's razor is the principle that if you have an explanation that's more simple, more direct, less complicated, and explains the phenomenon that you are trying to explain, there's no need for an extraordinary explanation if you have a more direct material explanation. So that kind of relegated God to the status of unnecessary explanation. And that has affected people's belief in God because his, her, its role in explaining a physical reality in a scientific sense has receded over the centuries. So that's a very brief summary of how things have developed. So just to kind of summarize what's our situation right now is you have a very powerful scientific establishment that, thank God, is there and it does its work the way it does. As we know, it protects us and informs us in many, many significant ways, not least of which is the field of medicine and many other things. However, science, I like to describe science with this analogy. Imagine yourself in a dark room, in a completely dark, closed off room. And all of a sudden you turn on a very bright spotlight into one corner of that room. And whatever you see in that spotlight is highly illuminated. And however, the rest of the room remains dark. So science, and what it looks at, is exposing a reality, physical phenomenon to a very, very bright light that really shows us what's there.
Good
But it
analogy.
doesn't necessarily show us what is not in that spotlight. And scientific method, per se, does not need God as a scientific hypothesis. God is not a scientific hypothesis. So I sort of think of these two realms as separate but equal. So you can, on the basis of scientific knowledge, choose to infer that there is a God based on, what we know about the physical world, but that's an inferral. Okay, that is a deduction. That is not scientific proof. I think that it's a oxymoron to say that you can prove God scientifically. The science does not have the tool nor the desire to prove God scientifically. It cannot do it. It does not want to do it. It does not need to do it.
It can't expand that beam of light
Right.
further out, and it's a big dark room out there.
Right. If it did, then it would no longer be science. Then you're going into the realm of philosophy, metaphysics, which utilizes scientific knowledge, but it is not scientific method to incorporate God as part of your scientific hypothesis or
And science
experimental
will agree,
procedure.
it doesn't have the tools to look at the big picture. It's still trying to find that unified field theory. It's still trying to identify dark matter. It's still trying to make its equations work.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
can never
Which
assume
is
that we
fine,
know
yeah.
everything that we could possibly know at any one point. Yeah.
And just to finish up here, on the other hand, religion cannot prove the existence of God in a scientific manner. Okay, God is not provable or verifiable hypothesis, either in terms of religion, religious theory, or religious belief. I mean, you can prove the existence of God only, in my estimation, in your own internal experience. Okay, and you can share the fruits of that experience with other people, and that's called religion. I'm not going to make a distinction here between spirituality and religion. That's a kind of a different discussion. I'll just equate them for the time being. So your spiritual experience shared with other people is religion. And the benefit of that experience can inform your understanding of scientific knowledge, and they can be complementary, and they can inspire each other to do what they do, and they can educate each other to do what they do. And so I see them as complementary, not as competitive, and certainly not trying to diminish the value of one or the other. So I think maybe I'll just leave it there, and I'm sure other people have thoughts about that.
Well, I do. And raise your hand and Paul will put you on.
I think we should follow with
before we go
Sister
to
Margaret
Sister
first.
Margaret. Oh, I have a comment for
Okay, go ahead.
Stephen.
Okay.
Number one is, when we say the word God, we've all grown up, I guess, or have been handed from history and mythology that picture, and I think it's so nicely illustrated by Michelangelo's God on the clouds with the white beard and hair, looking very majestic, and he reaches over and he gives Adam the spark of life. And then we go and see the 1952 Miller something experiments in the test tube, put the little piece of lightning, the little arc of electricity with those gases that represented Earth's early atmosphere. Boom, we have amino acids. I mean, it's just such a beautiful mythological reach over, put some electrical spark down, boom, life. So, our early ancestors were beautifully capturing some of these, what we now see as scientific experiments, scientific principles, mythologically. It's kind of beautiful. We can't say that they always believed their own metaphors, but it was a handy language for them to encapsulate principles that they saw. The Greeks, with their order versus chaos, could be entropy, second law of thermodynamics, with this organizing principle of life, this dance that's played. So, do we believe the metaphors, or can we see some underlying truths there? I guess I'm asking, what is the concept of God that we're all arguing about? I mean, the concept of the man with the flowing white beard sitting there with a staff, sitting on a cloud, has gone the way of Santa Claus. There are more sophisticated concepts, right? So what do you mean by God? What do you mean? I think organizing principles to the cosmos is a pretty good definition. I don't know beyond that. I don't know that we're just not arguing over semantics. I have to pose that question to you.
I guess you're asking me. I think that is one way of understanding God, and that is sort of a scientifically oriented way of understanding what God is, that you kind of fit God into the cosmic workings of the universe. But if God is a spiritual reality, I think that God is a lot more than an explanatory force for understanding the physical universe. I mean, it has to do with spiritual realities such as love, charity, that sort of thing. Things that are not directly observable by science. So when you have let's call it a observable phenomenon, like Stuart Kaufman talks about, which is a self-creating universe, where is God in that? Well, nowhere necessarily, if you don't want to think about it in that way. But then if you want to think about a self-creating universe, is why is there a self-creating universe? I mean, science can talk about how and what and when, but when you get to the question of why, science is not prepared, and it really limits itself in not asking why questions. And when you get into the whys of things, small or large, you're leaving science and you're entering philosophy and eventually religion. So it's great that we're learning about self-creating universe and that sort of thing, but it does not determine how we understand God.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said something really key, which was our personal experience informs us. And it is hard to have mystical experiences of that oceanic oneness, of that deep, deep connection and embrace and acceptance, and then go, well, that was just a brain chemical reaction. It is really hard to jump to that conclusion. And so I agree with you that those experiences do inform us. How could that be without something that we are actually touching and being embraced by? Mm-hmm. So our personal experience does inform us. But I was just looking for kind of a baseline definition that would meet both sides of the fence here, spirituality and science. You look at the compassion that's expressed through animals, ourselves included, and the cooperative relationships. That is supposed to be one of those evolutionary imperatives built into us because it helps us survive. So science can also dismiss that as merely, nature has learned that would help the species. Love is to get the opposite sexes to unite and procreate. I mean, any of that can be dismissed. Mm-hmm. But I don't know where we go from here, other than to say, I think you're right. Our own personal experience, going beyond, I feel more comfortable in the universe knowing that it's benevolent, or rather believing, because we can't know, believing it's benevolent, and that I have a personal relationship with it. I find that that's one of the joys of so many practices, ourselves and our own included, that we can have that personal relationship. I just have to tell you a quick story, and then yes, we have Margaret, Sister Margaret, and many others
I'll
to go to, but I want to tell you a quick story. So before Paul, I had a boyfriend. He doesn't know about this. But before Paul, I had a serious relationship with somebody who was very involved in Eastern religions, in the Vedic traditions. And I do hope to get the Vedic scholar that we know, professor of religion, on this show, and we can discuss much in that realm. I only know this tiny bit. So here was the boyfriend. studied this, was very involved in it, and he was always looking for nirvana, always looking for the end all be all abstract notion out there that must be the end all and be all, but not having a very personal relationship with it. And I was kind of like, okay, that's a guy's imperative. You want to go from point A to point Z in the shortest direct route, not have fun, not go on detours, not stop and smell the roses, as they say. You just want to get from A to Z. And I thought, you know, wow. And so we'd have this debate on my path, which was like, oh, have fun, enjoy it all. I believe that I will arrive there eventually when I'm supposed to. I'm not in a hurry. I'm going to enjoy every second, every rose that I meet, and, you know, all these wonderful adventures. And like, yeah, I'm safe on the journey, so I can take my time and have a grand adventure. So we'd have this debate. Well, I think we eventually broke up because of that. Like,
Sounds like a real dud. I'm glad you dumped him.
Like, who could bypass all the joy of life, you know, and all the all the personal relationship part of it. I think it was sitting where our own personal needs come in. Yeah. And I don't know. I thought you would comment on that. So.
Well, let's throw it into the discussion, but I also want to move things along because I want to have Sister Margaret.
Anybody for Stephen, we should.
Well, I will take care of that.
Okay, you're the moderator.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much. I just going to say, Tony had a comment, and also Chris Van Poel had a comment as well, and Dorian had a comment. So we can keep them kind of brief so that we can move on, because I want to hear Sister Margaret, since she's spent her entire lifetime devoted to religious practice. I'd like to hear from her as well, and not get too lost in the scientific debate, but simply just seeing where the meeting point between these two worlds are.
These are going to be juicy questions. So.
Okay, well, yeah. I'm moderating and saying that's what I want to go. So, Tony's up first. Yeah, Tony.
Well, a lot of things that Steve said. You gave me some thoughts.
Okay.
And I also agree with what Tony was writing. I agree with most of the comments that I've seen. And I have to tell you, the only D I ever got in high school was in religion class. And it was because I argued against the proof of God.
Oh, interesting. Well, let's introduce you right now. This is Sister Margaret O'Rourke, a Catholic nun with the St. Joseph of Corondale mission. Spent a long time in Chile there with her work, and recently retired to Los Angeles, native of San Diego. That's all I know about your background. Go ahead. Wanted to get that in.
Yeah. So, but continue what you're saying.
Well, first of all, I think those of us that have lived in the scientific world most of our lives, I think that we are more comfortable with mystery than most people are. Like there was one of the remarks on the chat was scientists don't set out to prove things. Yes, we're not all that caught up in truth and proving. When we set up for instance, when you set up an experiment, you set it up to get a negative result, because only a negative result is meaningful. If you get a positive result, it just means that in this instance, it's positive. But if you get a negative result, that's much more defining. And the whole idea of what we believe and what we don't believe. One of my professor of bacterial genetics at UCLA used to say, I don't have a problem believing. I just don't believe in the God that was given to me as a child. And I thought that was many years ago. And that got me thinking. And I realized that all the arguments that we have are about the concepts. And we forget that we made the concept. We imagined in the beginning, we created this God. We created this concept of God. And I don't see that as bad. You know, sometimes if I'm feeling sad or something pretty bad has happened, I can imagine God as a father and climb up onto his lap and talk to him. But that's not who God is.
Important distinction.
It's something that helps me at the moment. One time on a 10-day backpack, I got a little lost. I went off by myself, and when I get lost driving I can imagine God as a shepherd going after the lost sheep. So I'm not against using concepts of God as long as we remember that they're just concepts. Also, let's see. Tony could speak to this better than I can, but the quantum physicists that I have read, as they discover particles smaller and smaller below the atomic level, the quarks, and some of them are saying, we have come to something that is not a thing. One that I read said, what we have come to is more like consciousness. And I thought that was very interesting.
Profound.
And then, as you know from my other talk, my spirituality is more Celtic than Roman Catholicism. And, you know, clear back in the, I think, 2nd century, Irenaeus said that in his tradition, the whole of creation flows from something. And all things in the universe flow from this one.
I like that.
And because Roman Catholicism became dominant, we have lost many of those voices from the early Celtic tradition. And then another interesting one in the 9th century, John Scotus, an Irish teacher, he said, God is that which flows through everything. And then, of course, in the Bible, you know, in the first letter of John, we have God is love. And love is not a thing. So if we could stop thinking of God as a being, that might be helpful. And think of God as an attraction. Anyway, those are just some thoughts.
Beautiful thoughts. Beautiful thoughts.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
I love the way she
Yeah.
tied the thing together
Yeah.
in a clear
I like
way.
how simple and fundamental you are expressing it.
Yeah. Well,
So
and that's
just
why
get down to brass tacks here. Yeah. So
And you know, it's like talking about a specific topic and having someone who's dedicated their life to it. They had to boil it down to the simplest way that can be expressed for themselves to fit in, to find out where it all comes together.
I like that no matter what we think of God, he's far more. That it's not a being, it's far more. Yeah, like Stephen's dark room is a wonderful metaphor too.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Native American Great Spirit concept
Yeah.
and how it's another thing.
Let's go to questions.
I'll go. Well, Tony's already been brought up twice now, and turn your mic on there. Tony, you're on, and you want to share a thought and continue the conversation?
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually am really enjoying this. Margaret, thank you for your comments. And Stephen, you both kind of fired off all sorts of things that I like to say. And I guess this is my own personal observation. I've been through waves of everything from being attached to a personal God to taking another look at things from a little different perspective. And one of the things I've noticed are that there are many little phenomena, maybe even very big phenomena. I'm a scientist. Well, how have my discoveries come? Yes, I study things out, but then eventually I know the answer, maybe from a dream, maybe when I'm going on a walk, all of a sudden I know the answer because I study it out. And that I think is uh, not the way people think that scientists make discoveries. You think we crank huge codes and we do this and that. Yes, we do that eventually. And that's part of it's part of making the output objective and accessible as something other than a belief. Nothing wrong with beliefs, but science is a complementary way of looking at things. Chris said, science can't prove things. And we talked about Occam's razor earlier, Stephen did. And what science does is try and reduce things to the simplest way to look at things. I am just fascinated at this point in my career. I think Stephen said, science doesn't allow these inquiries. And to some extent, you're right. If I was in mid-career, I probably would be banned from the university if I even talked about some of the investigations I'd like to do now. But I think they're very important. And one of the things that I've had an absolute flood of is coincidence, where amazingly impossible things happen. Quick example, and I could give you 100 of these. On April 15th, 1977, I went to a concert at the University of Pennsylvania by a New York artist, and it was entitled Songs from the Hill. I bought the record, and earlier this year, I took the record out and discovered I had kept the ticket, the poster, and the notes. And the first line of the note said, "Songs from the Hill were written in the summers of 75 and 76 in Placitas, New Mexico."
Oh,
I live on the hill that she was looking at.
oh.
Now, how do things like this happen? I mean, it's and I could give you, I think, 100 stories like this. And this is something that I can get my teeth into a little bit. I think the more we pay attention to things, the more information comes to us. And yes, I think there are ways we can begin to use the scientific method. We can filter the questions we ask so that we don't get false positives. We can use Monte Carlo simulation and things like that. And actually, we probably have to start looking at big data, the kind of things that you all could probably tell better stories than I can tell of your experiences. Are there ways that we can collect this together? Paul and Laura are looking at ways to collect the trans-state data together. Are there ways that we can collect this together in a way that's more than storytelling, where we can look at families of solutions against families of data, and maybe we can begin to get some answers. I was somewhat impressed, actually quite impressed with Moody's research, Life After Life, where some very interesting questions were asked there. This might be an example.
Right.
But my approach is to start with, at this point, is not to put names on things other than something's going on, and maybe I can ask questions in the little sense, and the little pieces will add up to whatever they'll add up to. And then maybe I'm willing to use the word God again.
Yeah.
Well
It's
said.
fun.
Thank you, Tony. Go
It's
ahead.
it's sort of an interesting phenomenon where, there's always been this thing, at least in this society, where the male doesn't ask questions, it has to pontificate at what it knows. Laura's always taught me from the very beginning of marriages that she asks questions, and then she asks more questions, and then she asks more questions. That's created a journey of life and exploration for us. Led us to Dr. Goodman, led us to this research as asking questions. And so You know, it's that's probably the greatest lesson of all, is being able to ask. And I'm glad I don't have credentials to protect like Tony, that I'm going to lose my, I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose it all because I'm talking about God, or I'm talking about trance states or whatever. But anyway, I wanted to also follow up from Tony because Chris Van Poel had names been brought up, and she was reporting something that she had read, not that it was her comment personally. So I thought Chris might want to talk for a moment too.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris, you want to jump in?
Well, she's getting hooked up. I will just say that
Okay.
I think also that it's important to be comfortable with the unknowns and to embrace them, and not be so willing to jump onto easy answers. That, but at the same time, I feel like it's all okay.
You know, Chris is camping, isn't she? She might just be
No,
working.
I saw her in the room.
Well, I know, but she's.
Hey, just a quick comment.
Yeah.
And maybe this is going to talk about that, but big data, maybe we should talk about what we mean by that, but enough that we're not looking at 3 or 4 examples and saying, here's a conclusion.
Right.
I think there are ways to gather data from hundreds of thousands, even tens of thousands of people, and maybe begin to find some level of commonality, provided the right questions are asked of the data.
Right.
And I think this is something that we don't have to go to a supercomputer to do. We can begin to study these in a much simpler way.
Yeah.
So Chris, maybe she had an
Well,
internet
her
problem,
microphone is on
but
now, I think.
oh,
Chris,
okay.
Can we hear
We're
you?
about to quote your chat. She says, yeah.
There she
I
is.
just want to add something that what Margaret said so beautifully, from concepts of God. Those are our definitions. We impose definitions on things, from God to trees to whatever. And my problem with reduction also, or thinking about big data, is we're only as good as the variables we define and the variables that we put into the computer base. And just because we think we know all our variables doesn't mean we know that we've identified the correct variables. And this is something, last week Tony was joking about how his best cited paper was written when he was an undergrad. My best written paper that's most highly cited is actually the philosophy of science. So, and I'm actually teaching a graduate course for only grad students on the philosophy of science in terms of archaeology. So I'm thinking a lot about this. So I apologize. It's something I've been thinking about. I think more about science, like Margaret was saying, Sister Margaret, but I completely agree with her. Though. So I think when I'm thinking about, and excuse me, I just came back from camping 2 nights. I have 0 sleep for 2 nights, and I had to deal with young people under age 13 yesterday all day, and it was challenging. So I'm really tired and I'm loopy. I haven't even taken a shower from camp yet. I just got back in, but yeah. And so we have. I'm sorry.
I said, you're very lucid. You're fine.
We're honored you signed in with all that.
You sound great. Go ahead.
Well, thanks. But anyway, so just kind of a question about what Tony is, and I really appreciate the idea of taking big data and ANOVAs and all that. But again, the philosophers of scientists would suggest that you might not actually have the right variables. You may get an end result of what you think is correct, but that doesn't mean you set up your database to identify the correct variables. But that's just my cautionary.
Chris, let me come back to you and say
Okay.
that I 100% agree with this. And even in my archaeology work, when I do a research design, I do a large Monte Carlo analysis for false positives before I invest time in the field. And I think that there are ways we can do this. There's no perfect way to do it, but maybe we can get away from a number of pitfalls. You know, obvious interpretations that have to come from the data, whether they're right or not. You know, we want to avoid those. So I think we're in violent agreement on that. That's the deepest part of the art, is having the right questions.
Yeah.
And Christine,
Well, and I would just challenge in the nature of science is, how do we know we have the right questions? I know that sounds so superficial, but going back to the guest speaker last week, he talked about some of the dogma in neuroscience, which put people back 20 years. And I think that sometimes we think we have the right questions, but then it puts us back. But anyway, it's just,
Good.
I agree with you, Tony. In principle, what we hope is science is self-correcting, that through times asking questions, right? That's the beauty of science, is that with enough time and effort, all of us will get a little bit closer to right, whatever that may be, but it's going to take a lot of time. But what we can do is say, that didn't work so well. Let's start here. But absolutely, I think just for me as a scientist, I'm like Margaret, most of my life is being trained in science, even though I do religion. But, you know, how do we realize we don't have the right answer and we keep moving forward in our field of science, if you will?
And I'm also worried, what is our worldview that we've inherited from the culture and the time in which we're born? How much is that blinders, serving as blinders on us?
Laura, could I jump in on this?
Yeah, and then Christine, before you go, you had a reaction to something that Stephen was quoting last week that we didn't get to hear very clearly. So I want you to ask that after Tony of
Okay.
Stephen,
And then
what that quote was
and
that
I'll let
intrigued
Hess her
you.
hand up as
Yeah,
well.
go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, if I could just
Yeah.
answer, which I think Chris will agree with, and I think most of us will agree. One of the biggest delights and excitement in science is finding something that doesn't work.
Margaret was saying. Yeah.
If you want to see the juices of science get up, of scientists get up, it's, oh my goodness, we now have to introduce dark energy. What is that? and because things are not working. I mean, this is a great joy. And so if we can begin to formulate questions in the right way, we will come up with imperfect answers, but we may be able to set up a way to look at these things that will lead to better and better answers over time, with other intellects and other observations coming in, other boundary conditions.
Right.
So I love this discussion. And Laura, you're absolutely right. The cultural bias is a huge thing, and that's one of the hardest things to filter out.
Well, and the philosophy of scientists have kept saying that our biggest problem is we are so theory laden that our questions, our unit construction, our typologies, everything is based on our cultural perception. So it really feeds back in. If we want to be completely objective, that's really impossible to do, because we have all these other biases that we may not even be aware we're making in the world of science.
Well, I would like our own personal experience and anecdotal experience to also be more valued. Like you were saying, Stephen, that our personal experience needs to come in and help inform the equation.
I mean, that's
Why
at the,
not?
that's at the foundation of this institute. We're collecting experiences.
Yeah.
We're putting them in a database. You know, is that science to have a subjective, so I had this and I experienced this and this came to me and I had a vision of this. You know, is that science? For us, it has to be. We can't not include that in what we do. And whether it's, Laura's always worried I'm going to poke her with a pen. But whether that's in that whole avenue of exploration is documented, it has to be, because that's our only means.
That's all we have.
It's all we have is experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can
There is a word in science for experience. It's called empiricism. Okay, scientific experience is empirical experience. And that is a huge part of science, is empiricism. Not all of it, but a huge part of it. So there is
There's room for it.
An analogy there, yeah.
Let's go
Thank
to.
you. No, hold it. Christine, you were,
Oh,
Stephen, last Sunday, we couldn't hear you very clearly. Thank you, Stephen, for getting a new headphone and microphone. You made a quote that intrigued Christine. I was trying to look for it because I've got your book list here. What was it, Christine? You had read what Stephen read and you were commenting. I just wanted you to have a chance to.
When Stephen spoke up on last Sunday and said Nagel had talked about Nagel, I just thought that was really important, because I thought Stephen was 100% on that, our guest speaker, and he was a wonderful, beautiful guest speaker. I like what he had to say, and he's really good at what he does. But I felt like he was so narrowly so narrow, and his definition of science was so really narrow, and his definition of God was so really narrow. And as I understood, what Stephen was getting at was that maybe it's not what we think, and maybe he ought to explore this
Right.
not such be narrow in both ways. And I think his question and comment, Stephen, was more to do with God, but one could also take that with science as well, with that same discussion as well. But that's why I thought it was brilliant. I asked Laura, I'm like, who is this? That's really a thoughtful question and comment last Sunday. So I was really excited to hear that Stephen came back, and that's why I rushed back from camp and haven't taken a shower and made sure I have my fourth cup of coffee. I'll probably be up again all night. But anyway,
We're so glad you're here.
Well, Stephen, repeat what you were trying to say. Last week.
Well, I would just recommend Thomas Nagel's books. I mean, they're not easy books to read, but he is a brilliant guy. And one of his books that I've listed, I don't know where that list is.
I'll put it up on the chat room.
One of them is Mind and Cosmos, and that has to do with reductionism in science, particularly in biological science, particularly in evolutionary science. And reductionism is a narrowing of the scope of the explanatory power of science to a very material basis. That's a scientific reductionism. He's also written another book called View from Nowhere. It's an earlier book. It has to do with philosophical reductionism. And again, that limits the scope of explanatory power in philosophy to material explanations of material phenomena. And Nagel criticizes these very reductionistic approaches, which in science is a very important word that we need to learn. It's called scientism. Scientism is an ideology of science, like fundamentalism is an ideology of Christian religion. Scientism, in my mind, is this distorted understanding of what science is and what science does. I'm sure Christine and Tony and Margaret are familiar with this term, scientism. But if you look it up, you'll see that it has a lot to do with preaching science as the only valid way of understanding reality. And we need to be aware of that, as well as religious fundamentalism.
Right.
That's not just dogma within science, that's science as dogma, is what you're describing.
Interesting,
Yeah.
So
It's interesting, though, that 93% of the population believes in a God of some sort. 40% of scientists, according to some studies I've looked at. So we make up our own mind.
Yeah.
Can I just add one quick thing?
Sure.
In my first year of grad school, I was reading a bunch of stuff called postmodern and post-processualism for archaeology, and I kept coming out and thinking, wow, this sounds and walks and talks like science. So I was confused, and that's what made me start looking at it. But nobody's come up with a good definition of what makes science science. We talk about demarcation systems, but I actually left grad school thinking, we don't have a good definition of science, not from the philosophers of science. And so it's a really tricky thing to understand. I know that's not gratifying, but I think it helps me because there's not in spite of scientists saying they have dogma and they think it's the right way, it's really much more variable. And I sometimes feel awkward saying this, but I kind of like what Friar Robin said with science is what scientists do. So going back to the Cuyamungue Institute I would talk about what Stephen says, inductivism. These personal experiences are important from a deductive approach, and it can be scientific because we don't really have a good definition for working science, I would suggest. So I really like that idea that, we can use these. That's good old science from inductive empirical belief system.
Well, let's remember that.
That's my last, I hope.
Let's remember that Newton began his study that became physics looking for the handiwork of God, right? So,
So we've had several
Einstein,
hands come up,
please
and
go
so
for it.
I'll continue with more voices in the discussion.
I love a panel discussion.
yeah.
This is great.
Arlette put her hand down. Maybe she got tired of waiting.
No, I didn't, but I didn't. And I
there you are. Go ahead.
Sorry, because I have to leave soon. So yeah, so this was came up earlier, but maybe, so I was reading about Darwin, kind of from a philosopher's and feminist point of view. And so they were describing how he did some of his work on insects and orchids and the whole pollination and the whole sensual part of that all. And how he kind of got involved with a pencil. It was like he tried to kind of also excite the orchid, because the orchid really has some kind of, sensual excitation,
Mhm.
And so they were talking about that, and they said, okay, he did body experiments. So we always talk in science about thought experience. Do this thought experiment, think about it. He said he was doing body experiments by using his body, and get involved in this whole interaction with this animal, with his own body, trying to imagine how, his body would be, in his writings, how his body would interact in this whole thing. He kind of started to figure out what was happening. And I think we do as scientists often these body experiments, often this living in, with great breakthroughs. You always learn that people don't get them behind their desk, but that when they envision themselves as part of that, you have these aha moments. So I think there is much more there in doing scientific, work. But then it has to be all brought back to the scientific methods, and this never is kind of communicated in publications or so, because it's not part of the scientific method.
Brilliant. Thank you for communicating
Yeah.
that. That's such a, it's the aha moment that we live by.
All right, and
sure,
Joseph and Brian have their hands up, one of them or both of them together. So you guys want to share a
Thank you,
thought?
Arlette.
Thank you, Arlette.
Thank you, everyone. Steve and Sister Margaret, Tony, Christine. This is a very rich conversation to be having, and I'm happy to see it within the context of Cuyamungue, within the context of trans postures. Laura, you recommended to us that we take a look at the movie, My Octopus Teacher, and we watched that, Joseph and I, last night. And I think that brings a different take on science, which is, as you were describing, the inductive, the subjective. But this filmmaker also brought a high quality of art and artistry and storytelling to his craft as he explored a relationship which lasted about a year or more, exploring off the Cape of South Africa, a relationship he kind of stumbled upon in a coincidental, maybe synchronistic way with an octopus. And it started from a question. Really, he was trying to understand behavior that he observed that day in the octopus that he couldn't really account for. And as he followed every day back to this spot, he filmed the encounters and built a relationship to the point that the animal, the octopus, sort of established a bond with him, you could say. That was a very fragile bond that was tested through sometimes some frightening experiences. Anyway, that just reminded me about the great allurement that seems to be here in this world. The fact that the orchids have a fragrance, or the fact that they attract the insects, or the flowers attract us from a sense of beauty, or the sunset can evoke something deep within us. I feel like we're living in a time devoid of that beauty and that allurement, and we need new metaphors. We need kind of a new understanding. And I find like the trance experience, and Tony alluded to this by way of his experience, if I could call it insight, that the trance experience can offer us an experiential, embodied way to build empathy with the natural world and with a deeper aspect of ourself, just as can other embodied practices, meditation might be, or yoga. But the trance postures had a particular way of doing this. So I just wanted to bring to the discussion the beauty of that movie, My Octopus Teacher, and thank Laura for recommending that. Also, just a little bit of wisdom from the Sufi mystic Hafiz, who, and this is a book I refer to a lot from Matthew Fox, One River, Many Wells. And Matthew Fox is a great, interspiritual teacher. But this is from Hafiz, and he says, "Dear ones, beware of the tiny gods frightened men create to bring an aesthetic relief to their sad days." And apparently this is paralleled by Meister Eckhart, who in the Christian mystical tradition offered a prayer that said, "I pray to God to rid me of God. I pray to God to rid me of God."
Mhm.
What images and projections of divinity do we need to move beyond and let go of?
Mhm.
What I find so inviting right now, and what science is doing, it's not dispelling my notion of divinity, it's deepening it by challenging me to see a larger context. One of the frustrations I personally felt at this time is that too many people are defining such narrow concepts of what matters, who's important, what God is, what's morality. There's such narrow concepts of who this divinity is. And maybe that does cause a great deal of dissension. Mythology, maybe to really flourish, has to be free to be creative again. Maybe that's like what Joseph brings, and other artists, they have that freedom to go back to that creative moment. The cosmogenesis that we've heard of in previous talks, Brian Swim and others talk about as well. But anyway, I just want to offer that maybe the CI Institute and the work that we do subjectively, our subjective experience can help us enlarge our notion of what divinity is and have more embodied experiences that we can share and communicate with and point to and help each other find our way there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That is so beautiful.
Yeah,
And I want to say you're sitting next to an artist and he contributed a beautiful essay on that inner process that's so related to ecstatic trance and these drawings. And I just want to say that, art is a language that we speak. Mythology is a language we speak. Personal experience, direct experience, all of this is there to inform us, to enrich not just our life, but to enrich our worldview and what we do with it all. This is a celebration of life, just having this discussion, and to help enrich how we're going to go forward in the world that we create. We're one link in a very long chain. We're in the here and now. What are we doing with it? Could we blow it all up tomorrow? How sad that we would be the generation that loses this miraculous continuation of history, of culture, of exploring, of knowledge, and that we would do it on behalf of all of the web of life on this planet. And we have such grave responsibility. We have to have these conversations. We have to figure out where we're going and why and how, and get on the same page with the rest of the world. We need to each steer our ship so that collectively we do. You have something to say, Joseph?
Joseph,
Yeah.
I would just, with what you're saying, the continuation of what we've been talking about, what Paulette talked about body experiments, how this is such a personal, every one of us has our own intimate relationship to this topic, and how we see it and we experience it, and actually ultimately how we can use it. So I really resonated the word body experiments, because that's how we how it comes through us and how it moves us in the world, making decisions, and how we go about living our lives. And that's the real richness, I think, that you're talking about. Our body as a sensor, and it connects to the ecstatic trance work that
Body as a sensor, like we are the scientists
we are
at the same time. And if it's good enough for Darwin, it's good enough for us.
Yeah,
So it gives us permission, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Thank you, Arlette, for bringing that point
Yeah.
up again, because
Such an important
I mean,
one.
it's at the foundation of everything that we're doing here. So,
And that art is that way to flow through, and just by bringing the experience through art, whatever the arts are, it really informs us. It helps enrich that process, and it teaches us something. It has something to say. Go ahead.
creativity is so paramount of importance these days with all the world events. Creativity and imagination, we all have to really tap into that and really put it out there and utilize it for our own, so we're not trapped, we're not stuck in the world that it's being clamped around us.
They say math is this universal language, but I would also say that art is, because it speaks to us on this primal, holistic level. We grok it directly. It speaks somehow, bypasses some parts of our brain, but and lights up other parts of us.
There's math and creativity too, so it all fits.
I'm saying it's not just the one, it's the
Right.
multitude.
Altogether.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah. So what were you going to say?
Oh, and not to state the obvious, but right now with the division that we see politically and all the things that are going on around the planet, especially in this country, I'm more aware of, to be able to bring together and actually have discussions where we can have all the major religions sit down to a table, or we can even sit down and have a conversation like we're having today, and bring in the scientists and bring in the religious scholars and have a
And
discussion.
the artists and the
artists
mythologists and the poets and the,
I said,
yeah.
it's so
Well,
beautiful to be able to follow
It was
that.
so interesting, Stephen, your discussion in the year opening was, this is how science managed to push everything else off the table, God. But we're also in an age where the arts are pushed off the table, music is pushed off the table in terms of our education. So much of what causes us to be well-rounded people that our founding fathers in that era considered in the Age of Enlightenment, that you must learn to manage a farm, that you must learn to ride horseback, you must learn the arts and the literature of the ancient languages, you must learn how to have oratory skills, you must learn they were so well-rounded. What are we doing to ourselves today? So thank you. I think the arts are important.
I'm going to invite, let me see, I was going to go back to the chat room here. Dorian, you've made several comments in the chat room, and I'm not going to read them all. So would you like to speak and share a thought on what your insight on this? Turn on your mic and for a minute and share. See, still there.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, we
Yeah.
got you, Dorian.
Thanks. Yeah, I just shared a couple quotes. I love the discussion that's going on so much, and it's just my mind and my body are both racing and just really enjoying this process. I don't really have anything additional to say. I just wanted to provide those quotes because I felt like they were poignant. The only thing I do want to say is that I feel like phenomenology is a great place in science right now that is related to your institute, because it emphasizes the experience of people and then takes the scientific method as we understand it to be and uses those experiences as the data to be interacted with and interpreted through that scientific method lens.
Yeah.
Well said.
Could you read your quote, since some of us aren't able to
See the
quite
chart.
see it? Go ahead and add it to the
The
herd
first
discussion.
one,
Yeah.
first quote was from Carl Jung. To this day, God is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful path violently and recklessly, all things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions and change the course of my life for better or worse. And then the second quote is actually from Terence McKenna, but it's on Descartes. And it's, on the night of September 16th, Descartes had a dream, and in this dream an angel appeared to him. This is documented by his own hand, and the angel said to Descartes, the conquest of nature is to be achieved through measure and number, and that revelation lay the basis for modern science. René Descartes is the founder of the distinction between the res verens and the res extensia, the founder of modern science, the founder of the scientific method that created the philosophical engines that created the modern world. How many scientists working at their workbenches understand that an angel chartered modern science? How cool.
Yeah, it's a great addition. Thank you for highlighting those two quotes. Absolutely. Yeah, so go back to the discussion.
Yep, we'll take questions, but also there have been some book submissions
Oh,
from
yeah, let
both
me
Sister
put that up.
Margaret and from Stephen and from Christine. And I went and looked at my collection of books, not all of which I've
Let me
read.
do something.
But it would be fun if you all just touched on a sentence or two, recommended reading for anybody that cares. Christine, you just have one, and you might run off to go shower. So do you want to explain yours first before we lose you? I don't know. I'm glad you're hanging with us, So. Yeah, sorry, we can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting that the head of the Human Genome System, Francis Collin, wrote The Language of God. So here's one of the most preeminent scientists in the world. He actually just on Thursday received a prize from the Templeton Foundation, which actually the Templeton Foundation is actually having these conversations exactly like today going on all the time, where they're looking at science and religion and the big questions. And anyway, going back to Francis Collin, as a geneticist who ran the human genome system, he suggests that, and he will use that term, and I'm using his term because I get the caution of using the term God, but he says that God is in the very structure and wrote our DNA. And so again, he just won an award for all his work as a premier scientist.
God is inherent in the very structure of our DNA.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my interpretation. I take fault if I'm wrong.
Well, we asked Ryan last week, so is there a God spot? He goes, no, it's all through the brain. So like, yeah.
Well, the idea of a God spot is he was taking exception to that. And I agree with him, actually. I mean, that's a very rudimentary and simplistic way of understanding how the brain works. And that's what he was, objecting to.
Yeah, I know.
We,
Thank you, Stephen. So,
yeah, I
we're saying there's
created,
no one spot. It's holistic. It's like a field. Go ahead.
no, I created a page of all the book recommendations, from Sister Margaret, from Christine, and also, of course, Stephen.
Yeah.
So that's on the website. I included that link in everybody's email this morning, and I just posted it again in the chat room, just in case you didn't get that. There's a full page of those books and recommendations.
Yep.
So if you want to further say, what are they talking about? Who's this author you're speaking about? That's all there, so.
And I'll recommend My Octopus Teacher, as Brian brought
I
up,
put that
on
in.
Netflix. It's a wonderful film. Stephen, you want to quickly recount your book list for us?
It's a lot.
Okay, let's see, how do I find it?
A few sentences on each?
I'll put it
Yeah.
up on screen.
No, because I'd like to see Stephen. People can go see it later on.
Okay.
All right, well, let me find it here. Okay, I've got it. So can you see me? I think so. The first one is by the Dalai Lama. I put him first because he's the most universally known person, an acknowledged person, and he's quite a wonderful thinker and very universalistic and not particularistic, religiously speaking. The second book, do you want me to describe each one? I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, the title, The Universe in a Single Atom by the Dalai Lama. And it's a personal exploration of science and spirituality. So some people may have problems with these exceedingly academic or exceedingly intellectualistic explorations of this topic. I mean, this is an intellectual topic, but it does not have to be explored very intellectually. I mean, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. The second book I just put there because it's a potpourri of different kind of thinkers writing shorter essays, which might be on spirituality more than on religion, if you know the distinction. They're not particularly interested in religious traditions per se, but just the reality of our spiritual existence. And then the next book is a more...
Is the one you're citing, On the Mystery of Being? Yep.
On the Mystery of Being, I'm sorry, yes, On the Mystery of Being. So that's got a foreword by Deepak Chopra. It's very pluralistic, let's say, in its approach. The next two books by Ian Barber are much more conventional Western Christian histories of how religion and science grew up together, confronted each other, and how they can live together.
When science meets religion, enemies, strangers, or partners, ? Good title.
Right. And then the next book there, Religion and Science, are his lectures based on the same material. And they're a little more straightforward and less involved because they're oral lectures. So that's also Ian Barber. Amoral Science, number 5. I just put that there because he seemed like an interesting guy, very almost not anti-intellectual, but very personalistic in his exploration of the relationship between science and religion as he developed it in his own experience. Then the next two books are by Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel is one of the most well-respected philosophers on the planet. He specializes in exploring the relationship between religion and science. And as I said before, Mind and Cosmos has to do with evolutionary theory and reductionism in evolutionary theory. He critiques that reductionism. And in the next book, The View from Nowhere, he critiques reductionism, the emphasis on material causality in philosophy in The View from Nowhere. Number 8, John Hott is a very well-known American theologian who has specialized in talking about the relationship of science and theology. He is a Christian, but he does not take a particularistic Christian view of things. He's really universalistic in his religious orientation, and he is a very, very bright guy talking about the subject. And then the last book is by a historian of science, Peter Harrison, and he really puts science and religion not in a religious frame and not in a science frame, but in a very mutually supportive frame in terms of science and the history of science and religion. So that's a book I would recommend for people who are interested in science. So that's my list.
Okay, I'm going to
Thank
pop
you.
up so I can show other people's list that was added. I'll show the website, it'd be faster for me to
And
do
then
that.
we have Sister Margaret could recount her list too. So.
And so,
yeah.
you see, yeah, so these are all the books.
Thank you,
just
Stephen. I
Stephen
appreciate how
recommended.
well read you are and deeply read.
And then
And-
Christine had a couple books in the list here. I get small text to read it, but it's there on the page.
She's the one book she already mentioned.
Okay, and
And
The
then-
Language of God, a scientist presents evidence for belief. Sister Margaret had us like 6 or
Do you want to recount yours, Sister Margaret,
Well,
just quickly?
Well, I can put them up on the screen.
Yep.
It'd be faster for her. So she doesn't have
And then
to.
I have a few books, I have to say.
Okay.
I haven't quite read them yet, but they look interesting.
So the link is on the website, and if you don't have that link and you still don't have that link, let me know. But I sent it out in today's thing. Plus, I just put it in the chat room, and
Yeah.
also all of the things that we're talking about will be listed there. Okay.
I have read some of this. The Human Cosmos, Civilization and the Stars by Joe Marchant. This was fun. Brian Swim, The Universe Story, recommended by Brian and Monica. And Cosmic Conversations, just something I happened across. God and the Multiverse, Victor Stenger. That looked interesting. That's a good title.
These are not written down, by the way, so they're not going to be on
Yeah.
our list. Unless if you want to type
I
it
just
all
went up
up.
the bookshelf this morning. A Beautiful Question. Yep. And this was a fun one. I love this book. I want to get this guy on. He's a professor at the University of Washington in my hometown, Seattle. And he's writing a book on water. And he's saying that there's a fourth state of water beyond solid, liquid, and gas. And he's saying that it behaves differently when in contact with living tissue. So water is so miraculous and found throughout the universe. I think this is water, we take it for granted. I think it's a miraculous substance, and it gets into that why the universe came together the way it did to support life. So worthy of investigation. So
Additional questions or comments from anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak? We do have an open session.
but we're going to Margaret first, so she can run down her
Oh,
book
sure.
list.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to go down your book list, Sister Margaret, please?
Yeah, just a sentence or two.
She's turning.
Well, I don't have,
You don't have it in front of you?
That's, I can put it up on the website.
Okay.
Make it easy.
yeah, it's on the website.
Okay, enough said. Yep.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So, no, I don't have a gallery view, so I can't tell if
Oh.
his physical hands are being, anybody want to raise their hand to share? Or just, in the
science
discussion?
is parabolic. What do you mean by that, Stephen? Parabolic. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And Chris is,
Well, I just took it from a statement by the editor of Parabola magazine. It's a very sort of literary sense of the word. It's not a mathematical sense of the word. And a parabola is a line that never quite, it's a point that never touches a line, or a line that never touches the point. And it's kind of like an ongoing quest that gets closer and closer, but never really reaches a destination. It's always an in-process quest. And I was relating that to the scientific method, that in a personalistic sense, it's an ongoing quest that's taken on by individuals and by groups of individuals that really, they don't really know where they're going, and they don't really know how they're going to get there, but they're doing it together. And they're doing it methodologically. So at the one hand, it seems very organized. And on the other hand, it really is, as Christine was saying, it really is not that organized on an ultimate level. Everybody's kind of groping in the dark together, and they know how they're going to take the next few steps, but they're not quite sure how things are going to end up, because there's no way of knowing. And that's kind of like a parabolic quest, that people don't really think of science in those terms. And as Chris was saying, there's a very, very famous book by Thomas Kuhn, who kind of revolutionized how people think about science as a quest that is kind of the blind leading the blind. Scientists don't like to think of themselves as the blind leading the blind. They really don't like that. But it's a very important book anyway.
and Christine put that in the chat room, the structure of scientific revolutions. Yeah, so yeah, agreeing with you. I would also like to credit ancient wisdom by really, I think, questioning that, or stating that consciousness might be a key here. Because as Margaret alluded to earlier, when you start tearing apart the structure of this material world that we are so convinced is in our scientific dogma is all that there is, that what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG world. When you really start tearing it apart, as the forefront of science is doing, we're finding that that's there is not there, that substance is really electromagnetic wave or empty space, dark matter. We give it string theory, the 0 point. We give it all these different names depending on where you're at with that. But it's always landing right back to what is it? The nothing, the void, the all. What is it? So it seems like maybe as this trajectory of science goes forward, it might come full circle back down to it's all consciousness. It's all something that is this fundamental stuff of which metaphysics is saying is there, even finer than the ethers. I don't know. What do you think? I would just love to see it all come full circle and then confirm what ancients have said in their various different languages of mythology and thought and what have you. What do you think?
Well, Laura, I'll just bring up an important point, emphasize an important point that you made, is that in general, science likes to think of the universe as impersonal. And religion can think of the universe as essentially personal. God or whatever is a personal being. Some people don't like that idea, but that is one essential way of discriminating between a scientific understanding of reality as impersonal and religious understanding of reality as the universe is essentially and primarily personal. And you can relate to the universe as a personal entity that cares about you. The universe is friendly, as opposed to the universe couldn't give a shit about you as an individual person. That's an essential differentiation, and you don't have to agree one way or the other, but that's one way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly have a personal relationship that we are meeting at the universe with in our experiences with this. I will say that, I had an interesting experience as a child, And I was not brought up in a religious household at all. My mother just felt that if you want spirituality on a Sunday, let's go to the hiking. Let's go to the cathedral forests of the Pacific Northwest. Let's get out in nature. That's my church. She would always say, she was a real nature sprite. My parents were very moral, and your character was your answer to the world. If you had character, that was what was important to go about the world with those very qualities that you're describing. It didn't take a religion to put those there. That was your being, and that's what you earned your way, and you earned your place in the human family through that, as what they taught, and you gave back. So interestingly, but as a child, I remember being parked at a babysitter who was religious, and she had the giant picture of Jesus on her wall, and the one that with the eyes that would follow you around. And I remember knowing nothing. I wasn't raised in this. I had to go to school to find out people believed in Jesus. I mean, it was really, but staring at this picture and having this download, this personal relationship instantly with Jesus. I didn't even know his name. It was just amazing, you know, and through life, I'm like, yeah, I have a personal relationship with Jesus, even though I've never been religious. It's that powerful. And I always thought of it as the mother goddess, if I want to look at it intellectually, the mother goddess and all those attributes being placed in a male because women lost their place as well through history. You know, we grew up 99% of our human history as hunter-gatherers, indigenous cultures. There was a mother goddess. There was the feminine principle as well as the male principle. Father Mun, Sister Moon, the universe was male or female, Earth was male or female. I mean, there were male and female had an equal place in the cosmology of early societies.
So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So I just want to say that some of those personal relationships, and it was a piece of art that kind of downloaded it to me instantaneously. It was just, well, I mean, what, you grew up in a Christian society. I mean, it's inevitable. It filters through. So I want to say I embrace it all.
Yeah.
All the various aspects of it. It's multi-pronged, multicolored. It's a fabric with many woofs and wharfs and wefts and whatever the language is for that. I just think it's all beautiful,
You know,
to embrace it all.
yeah.
And the ancients and the modern and the whole thing. I mean, it just takes all of it to describe it, and it's an endless journey of which I celebrate and appreciate.
Well, you know, I mean, growing up at a time
your
when
upbringing was quite different from mine.
Well,
Yeah.
growing up at a time when, back, for example, using television as an example, back when television had 3 channels to choose from, that was sort of like religion. You had just a couple things to choose from, and there wasn't a lot of expanded thought, at least where I grew up, or maybe my own family, maybe it was there and didn't see it. But so we chose a traditional path to open doorways, and for me, that was a significant part of my discovery, you know, of finding.
Set you on the path of
Set me on the path of spirituality. You know, I've told the story before, but it's kind of
I just
fun.
had angel visitations direct.
Yeah.
That was it. Yeah.
No, I mean, once I got to be like a senior in high school, I really started questioning everything, and I started reading everything, and I was the Theosophical Society, and I was looking at these different traditions of
Mystical Christianity.
mystical Christianity, and all these kinds of thoughts, and I was reading all this stuff. My mother got concerned, so she set up an appointment with a local pastor for me to go have a meeting. So I went and I sat down with the pastor, Reverend Richard T. Smith. And I sat down with him, and he says, what is this thing your mother's talking about, Paul? And I said, well, I'm reading these books, and you know, there's a lot of hidden truths to these things. And I was trying to explain the whole thing to him as if it mattered to him. And he shook his head, and he says, I just have always thought you'd want to be part of the ministry. Like I was going to. And I appreciate the fact that he saw me that way, but it was part of that thing. It's like my mother would prefer that I, you know, that stay traditional, and but in some ways it was this discovery changed my life. I was a different person. My best friend in high school didn't even recognize me. Everything shifted, but once I started finding these discoveries and started drawing these connections. So hopefully for everyone else is that.
He grew up in a small town in Maine.
Right.
And
I don't
your
want-
pastor said, oh, go to California, that's a dime a dozen out
Right,
there.
right. All that new age nonsense, right. So anyway.
But I will say the age in which we live is glorious in the fact that we have a marketplace of ideas to draw from.
Right.
That we have permission and we are encouraged, and it is really our duty to go out and figure it out. And we've got this smorgasbord to draw from.
And bringing it back to Dr. Goodman, just for a minute, because this is her institute. I mean, here's a person that she had her religious studies, her scientific research, and then also her exploration into the field of mysticism and having a foot in both worlds.
She crossed that
She
objective
crossed that,
subjective
like we've
barrier.
done today with
Yeah.
all the scientists that have been in part of this conversation, being able to not feel conflicted by that, but actually seeing a direct connection. And so those are the scientists I want to hang around with, that have that kind of opening, that kind of open mind to say, yes, but. I mean, I have a personal friendship with Tony, and we have great discussions together, and I just so appreciate the thoughtfulness.
And with Stephen and Dory.
And Stephen and Dory,
Yeah.
right. We go to Stephen and Dory's house, and they make us dinner, and we have these kinds of discussions as well. And so I wanted to tell you also, you getting ready to read something?
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Joseph and Brian have had their hands up for a while, so I have another comment
Okay,
from them.
a really quick one then, while you guys
Okay.
get your mics on. I was intrigued, Stephen, by the title of the Dalai Lama's book, The Universe in a Single Atom.
Yeah.
And we were talking about experience. We often in trance, and I hear this not just from myself and Paul, but from many of the participants in our CI circle reporting their experiences, I see an eye, and then I notice in the iris is the cosmos. I go through a tiny point and it opens up and there's the cosmos. I see a grain of sand and there is the cosmos. We have these direct experiences. And so what makes me wonder, the Dalai Lama titling his book like that, if that is also a shared experience in his meditations. Because it seems to me that with this universal, I don't know, experience that's informing us, that would be one. That you see from the microcosm to the macrocosm. You see in the smallest particle the immensity and the vastness of the all. It's holistically embedded in everything. Yeah, just beautiful.
Isn't that a holographic understanding of things? I mean, that's how we understand how the brain works. And,
You can put that to it, but I'm saying it's a direct experience. We're not conjuring it up. We're not intellectualizing it.
Right.
We're staring at a point or an eye, and then we notice we're out there in the cosmos. This is we feel it. We feel we're a tiny point, but we're immensity in a palpable kinesthetic way. I mean, it's interesting that the universe can be speaking to us directly in these ways. I know you've had these mystical moments in your path, and it seems to be telling us something, teaching us something.
Yeah.
I'm just harkening back, since we're about to go to Joseph and Brian, that what you're saying is that, and Arlette, these experiences of the body can deliver these beautiful lessons as well.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Maybe this is impacted in our DNA. Maybe this is what our DNA can deliver to us, and as well as our brain speaks to us on these many languages. Hey, Brian.
Hey, I was just going to offer, in addition, book resources. So there's a Quaker artist and scientist by the name of Mary Conroe Coelho. She offers a book called Awakening Universe, Emerging Personhood, The Power of Contemplation in an Evolving Universe. And what I like about this book is that she's very faithful to the science, but from her Quaker background and her experience as a biologist, as well as an artist, she talks at great length about the interiority, which Chardin has emphasized, and she can articulate kind of the evolution of, as she sees it, the progression. There seems to be a progression of personhood, of which right now we're expressing, but we don't know what that will be in future states of evolution. We don't know where the human's going. And so I really appreciate Mary Conroe Coelho. And then there's a Jewish physicist by the name of Howard Smith. He writes a book called Let There Be Light, Modern Cosmology and Kabbalah, a conversation between science and religion. So what I appreciate about Howard Smith is his ability to articulate deep Jewish mystical concepts and give a very imaginative, possibly a theoretical framework by which the mystical language can be understood alongside the journey of the universe. So it's helpful to hear that. And then finally, Karen Armstrong, scholar of comparative religion. Really, she has a wonderful book, The History of God, and I get so much out of reading Karen Armstrong and hearing her perspective.
I love her too. Yeah.
So I just wanted to offer that.
Well,
Thank you.
now-
Will you
now-
send those in so we
yeah.
can add them to the list?
I'll add those to the collection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you'll just type those up and send them to me, and then Laura will type up her own list that she showed,
No, Karen Armstrong is brilliant.
and we'll add them all to the
Brilliant.
one list. Okay, good.
So anybody else got some books they want to recommend or comments or?
Yeah, nobody's hands are up. So unless if I'm missing something. you can-
Watch out because Paul will shut this down when
Well,
he doesn't
well,
hear
no,
any more
well,
contributions.
I like keeping things condensed and strong and powerful, and I think it's wonderful discussion. I'm so excited about what we've accomplished today, and I'd like to see that, we continue. And, this particular conversation was inspired by, and what Tony was talking about, coincidence, talking about how things come together for reasons. And I talked earlier about how Joseph's artwork came in a coincidence, if you want to call it that, where he on the
You'd
time,
already announced
and
it.
I already had announced that we're going to do an art and spirit project, and so I used him as the guinea pig or the the inspiration for us to in the newsletter. So those kinds of things. And Tony, not today, but I do want to have a conversation about coincidence, and I want to see how you want to look at it from a scientific point of view. And I just really want to bring forth what is this, because it happens so often, all the time. This continuation of this it's beyond explanation. But it's something that I would love
Talk
to.
about coincidence, talk about all the experiences that we have as a group,
Right.
and then looking at some of the artifact, and if we know more about this mythology, its culture, the iconography, as Chris has helped us out with.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
Right.
How do you explain those connections? We see it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Those are some interesting alignments, let's put. I don't know that they're a coincidence.
How does
Interesting alignments.
How does a young
Yeah.
guy from Maine meet a girl from Seattle? I mean,
Oh, you romantic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coincidence. Meant to be.
Fate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joseph, I took care of your questions. I'm going to lower the hand there. And did you want to have any final thoughts or more discussion?
I would like
Does
to
anybody wanna
invite
say
the
more?
audience for some final thoughts.
Final thoughts.
Or
Roundtable. Let's go around the room. Who hasn't spoken that would like to share a final thought?
I see your hand up. Yeah.
the-
I want to thank so much Stephen Heck.
Yeah.
And how brilliantly well read you are, and you've kept this up for a lifetime. And that, Stephen, you made the point earlier in a phone conversation that you had the luxury of delving into these topics in a deep, deep way early in your life. And kids today don't necessarily always get that opportunity. It's not as available as in your youth. Could you speak to that for just a moment?
Okay. Yes. Well, anybody who grew up in the 60s or the 50s or even the 70s realized that they had a lot more economic, if you grew up in the middle class anyway, compared to the middle class these days. Economically, things were very different. And I was able to go to graduate school for 10 years and not worry about supporting myself or getting a job or having a career. I could kind of postpone all that because of the way the economy functioned at that time. And kids these days are under a lot more economic pressure to get going on their career and earn money quicker, faster, more. And their ability to get educated in the quote unquote liberal arts or in a wide range of fields before settling on a career is greatly delimited these days. And it's really going to affect the ability of people to understand the world around them in an integrated way, a holistic way. And I just worry about exposure to great art, great music, great thinking that's been in the tradition of all civilizations, and people are not able to expose themselves to that. And it is just a worrisome cultural phenomenon, social phenomenon that concerns me.
Yeah. And, but at the same time, so much of this is available outside of university. That the culture is much more embracing of this in the general readership and popular TV shows, radio shows, podcasts, and all of that. So I will say that need is being fulfilled with other avenues, but not with as much, perhaps, discipline as you applied in your, writing your thesis and such. So thank you for that. Thank you for all the contributions that you made today. We're so happy, Stephen, to welcome you to our CI Circle in this way.
Yeah, right.
And we love Dory, so.
Well,
So thank you for that. I also want to thank Sister Margaret.
yes.
You and Cecilia, who I do hope to hear from, you sisters have just been so wonderful to have you here, to have members of an organized religion who have found your way to embrace ecstatic trance postures, to embrace your wider scope of spirituality, to involve, bring the threads of the Celtic Catholicism and all that you do, all the work that you do, Margaret and Cecilia, out there in the trenches
Right.
of society and the help that you do and the mission that you've had. I just want to thank you for all the good work that you've done over a lifetime.
Yeah.
So.
And she still continues to volunteer all week long for different projects.
Yeah. So many of our sessions you can't attend because you're there teaching English and doing stuff.
Yeah.
So do you want to say anything, Margaret, as a way to goodbye? And
Now that we've
thank
embarrassed you.
Yeah.
I think I was very fortunate to do my doctoral studies at Berkeley because it's an international community, really. My research group consisted of a New York Jewess, a Venezuelan Catholic, a white American Presbyterian, a WASP, and Sung Soo, a Korean Buddhist, and myself. And
Wow.
every class I was in was pretty much like that. And so it was a great out of classroom education.
Well, thank you. Any parting words to sum up our conversation today? And thank you for being a part of it.
I'm very grateful to be able to participate in this because I went through stages where I was trying to figure out where I really belonged. And I know I started out in my 20s and 30s where I was looking for and reading and studying things that were not acceptable to religious life. And then I got lost in the box, and I feel really called, and thanks to Margaret, who's really inspired me also to move out and discover. And I thank my parents because neither was Catholic. My dad did not practice. My mom was a convert. So we didn't go, our vacations were church for me, out fishing and in the woods. And that was my church. And I've gotten back to that. My church is my walk amid the trees and the birds singing. And this is just really helping me open my soul. Thank you.
Beautifully said.
Oh, thank you for that.
I think we can all go to church today. Sounds like a great idea. Let's go embrace this.
This is a celebration of life.
Yeah.
And community and
And it is Sunday.
spirit.
It is Sunday.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my. So thank you. And Tony, always a joy
Yeah, it
to
is.
have you. Is he
Yeah.
still here? And Christine, you have just been so just such a blessing.
Yeah. You really have.
To have you, weigh in
yeah.
that you do. Brian, we've so enjoyed all of our dialogues, your presentation. Joseph, I just want to, Arlette, another physicist, oh my gosh.
Yeah. That's true.
So, and those of you who haven't spoken up today, we just, well.
It's funny. I won't say any names, but we had an individual that's been attending our sessions who's a scientist, but says, please don't use my name because I don't want to have people of my credentials and things. And
he would say it would be bad for me to
maybe
be
bad for
outed,
people.
you know.
He doesn't
it's
want to
like
be
a secret,
outed,
like
outed that
secret
he's in our
society.
sessions. After coming for about 5 or 6 times or something, and then he hears Christine, and he hears Tony, and he hears all these other contributions from people that have a foot in both worlds. He said, "Can I be on too? Can I be interviewed?" You know. So that was fabulous. It was like, okay, yes, you can be. You know, we absolutely. And so we're outing a lot of scientists that are.
It's a safe space.
Yeah.
You know.
They're not going to find you
hang
at
out
the institute.
No, we're too tiny. We're not on the map.
So that makes it fun.
Anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so you.
I
Okay,
wanna
now
say-
he's got permission to end because I got to say
Laura,
thank you to
Laura could
everybody.
go another hour. She always could. I've never found a time where Laura was like, okay, let's stop. When we did a radio show together, it was constant. Like, Laura, no matter what you want to do, you got to take a break. It's hard breaks. They're on time. The show's going to be this length of time. And so she
Yeah,
just
but I
kept.
could go swing out in like
Well, she
30
started
seconds.
expanding her radio show. It went from 3 hours to 5 hours. We had a long overnight radio show of
I had
discussions.
an appreciative program director because we got as much or more mail in the days when people wrote letters in than some of the daytime drive time hosts, and he was astonished at that.
And and the ratings were
But
through the
people
roof.
have a lot to
People love
say.
this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, enough about us. Thank you. I'm gonna turn on the mics because you all should be able to talk to each other here. It's like everybody
Oh
ask
yeah,
all
let's
to
have a group
unmute.
conversation.
So
This
thank
was
you,
so
Tony,
fun. Thank
and
you.
Stephen and Socia and Phil and Margaret.
They can say goodbye
Kate,
to themselves. Yeah.
Joseph, Dorian.
He's unmuted
Chris,
you, so you can all say
You can
goodbye
all
to each
talk.
other.
Say goodbye to each other.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Great
Bye.
conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you to our panel. It was
Yeah.
great to have
So
all your
much.
voices.
Join us next week.
Tony, thank you.
Same time, same
Thank you.
Very good.
Paul.
Love to all. Blessings. Be
Bless
well.
My church today.
Yes, absolutely. Good to see you, Socia.
What
Okay.
a brilliant and vibrant